I'm not available next week, and the station has got another function on the week after, so we're going to miss a couple. But look, let me encourage our listeners to send the questions in. Keep them coming.
Yes.
Because even if we can't get to them for a couple of weeks, we'll be able to we record them all and we answer them, so we'll get round to it eventually. So keep the questions coming.
Well, we've had a few questions on coronavirus. Probably can't answer them right at this stage. And of course, there's been lots of recent news that, like, I want to ask you about Tom Brady. You know, that American footballer, quarterback, probably the best footballer ever. He's 43 years old, Dr. John. How does the human body do that?
It is amazing, isn't it? Particularly in a game like that, which is pretty brutal. If he doesn't get the pass away, they really let the quarterback have it. If they call it sacking the quarterback.
Yes.
And I watched the game yesterday, and I mean, it was definitely a case of the old bull versus the young bull.
Yes.
And the old bull won easily.
Oh, absolutely smashed him. I've got to say, I still don't understand all the the rules in the game, but I think basically the rules are go 1, 2, 3, 4. Everyone tackles everyone else, and whoever gets away tries to throw the ball to somebody else on the other end of the field.
Well, no, it's probably similar in a way to rugby league, where you've got 6 tackles, but they've only got about 3 in.
No, they've got 4 tackles
in rugby league, I said.
Oh, okay.
In rugby league, you've got 6 tackles. Well, they've only got 4 in gridiron. But yeah, I mean, there are similarities between that and both league and union.
They run at each other and smash each other. That's probably the similarities.
That's one of the great similarities.
Yes.
Yeah, but no, I didn't think much of the game yesterday. I've watched quite a few Super Bowls, and there've been plenty that have been really outstanding, but yesterday's was a bit scrappy.
Yeah, well, they should ban people like Tom Brady because he's just too good, and it makes everybody else look bad.
Yeah, well, yeah. Anyway, look, that's not what we're here to talk about, Nick. But,
of course, last week we were talking about Australia Day, Dr. John.
Yeah, we were.
There was a couple of minor errors in there, by the way.
Yeah,
we were talking about the First Fleet.
Yes, I
and
know.
Of course, when Captain Cook got here, that wasn't the First Fleet.
No, we didn't.
It was a precursor to the First Fleet.
We didn't say it was.
I did. I'll admit I made the mistake.
Arthur Phillip actually arrived in Botany Bay about a week before Australia Day. It was what we call Australia Day, as the day that he hoisted the flag at Circular Quay.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but they arrived at Botany Bay 6 days before that. So,
there you go.
So yeah, we were a little bit inaccurate in some of the things we talked about. But look, it's very interesting how what I thought to mention this week does relate a bit to Australia Day and the problems that we have now with the date and the interaction between the indigenous people in the beginning and the early settlers and the earlier explorers. Because in actual fact the interactions early on in the piece were often very, very friendly and cooperative and not antagonistic at all. I mean, there were a few minor skirmishes, but by and large it was relatively friendly. And it was only later on, after Darwin, that that things started to go bad. And a lot of the worst parts of our treatment of the indigenous people were in the latter half of the 19th century, not in the early part. And it's very significant that Darwin's book on evolution, that is the origin of species, that was published in 1859. And he followed it up a bit over 10 years later with another book called The Descent of Man, where he outlined his views on where humanity had come from, not just evolution. And they were very significant events, and they profoundly changed the way that European people viewed indigenous people, not just in Australia, but right throughout the world. And a lot of people don't realise where Darwin got some of his ideas about humanity from. because we all know that, you can get on or before COVID you could, get on a cruise ship and do a cruise of the Galapagos Islands and see the sort of things that Darwin saw there that helped him to formulate his ideas on evolution. But it was his ideas of humanity that really had the greatest influence on the interactions between the early Australian settlers and the local indigenous Australians.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't realise that there was a very, very significant event that happened in South America. Because everybody knows that Darwin went for his great voyage on HMS Beagle under Captain Fitzroy, and they went first of all to South America, the bottom part of South America, a place called Tierra del Fuego. And what a lot of people don't know or realise is that the Beagle, without Darwin, but under Captain Fitzroy, had been there a couple of years beforehand. And what happened then was that Captain Fitzroy had taken a couple of the younger Fuegans back to England to get them educated and get them to speak English and involved in English customs and so on. And the idea was that they would then go back to their homeland and perhaps introduce some of the English customs there, maybe get them to speak English and so on. And one of the young men was a fellow called Jeremy Button. And he and Darwin became great friends on the voyage. Well, Fitzroy was taking those people back this time, the time he took Darwin. And remember, Darwin was only 22. He was a young bloke, and Jeremy Button would probably have been a similar age, so they got on very, very well. Anyway, when they got back to Tierra del Fuego, and bear in mind that Jeremy Button at this stage was speaking English, dressed like an Englishman, normal customs that the English have. And Darwin, when he arrived there, went off for about 6 months exploring. And when he came back and met up with Jeremy Button again, he was absolutely aghast and horrified to find that Jeremy had actually reverted to his native state and the customs of his local people.
What do you know?
All of the English instructions had been long forgotten, and Darwin came to the conclusion that these people were not sufficiently evolved to be able to cope with the instructions that they had from England.
Although he'd already changed once, and
and look, truly, this was part of the. You can't blame Darwin entirely for it, but he certainly gave a great impetus to the idea of white supremacy. And I mean, that's what we're dealing with in the world at this time. This is what a lot of the protests around the world are all about. Against the idea of white supremacy. But we can sheet a lot of it home to Darwin. You're on 94.9. It is 18 minutes past 8. We've been talking a little bit about Darwin and his trip to South America. Don't forget, send your questions through for Dr. John to our SMS line 0401 949 949. That is a text line 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, you know that I've been involved in the ski industry over my life. I've spent many years down at the snow. I've even worked overseas in the snow. Now, I come from the era where, all the guys that lived and worked in the snow wear peaked caps. We wear pretty daggy big boots. We have, certain uniforms that we wear, and if I was taken away by somebody on a ship voyage for a couple of years to England or wherever it might be, and they showed me a whole new way of wearing clothes, and I admit some of the new, hoodies and stuff that guys wear, it's another way of doing things. They've got new waterproof boots that aren't big and chunky like my old ones. I reckon if you put me back in the snow for 6 months, I'd end up with a peak cap and the old boots again myself, So it's interesting that Darwin thought that just because somebody sort of reverted back to the way they used to live,
that would be regarded as, sort of less than human.
Well, yeah, and that really is what he did regard them as. And, of course, he formulated that view about the Fuegans, the people at the bottom part of South America. But on the way back to England after his 5-year trip, he came via Australia. And he saw the local Aboriginal people, and he thought they were even less evolved than the Fuegans. So really that had a huge influence on the way Europeans in general, and particularly people in Australia, regarded the Aboriginal people. Because prior to that, a lot of and prior to the publication of Darwin's books, missionaries both here and overseas had evangelised the indigenous people wherever they came, in accordance with Jesus' directives. Go into all the world and preach the gospel, which they did. And it was very much later, actually, probably 100 years after Captain Arthur Phillip, that things really began to go bad in this country in the latter half of the 19th century and early 20th century. And that's when some of the worst features of the stolen generation, so-called, took place. It was later on. It wasn't in the early days. And you'd have to say that Darwin had a huge influence on that. And, of course, we need to remember that a lot of the children weren't stolen really in any sense, but they were cared for after they were being abandoned or ostracised perhaps by their own communities because they were part European. So, the adverse effects of Darwinian beliefs can't be overstated. And even worse, now, of course, we can show that they're totally false. And we know that because of DNA evidence, and really we can see that we are all part of the one human family. I mean, interesting that song that you just played was called Family, and that's what we are. And modern genetics and DNA were totally unknown by Darwin. That hadn't been discovered by then.
Yes, absolutely. Well, interesting, isn't it? We are all part of the same family. We see so many, native people from different countries around the world that have become massive leaders in their countries. And John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. Send your questions through for Dr. John, 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, we've been talking a lot about Darwin after Australia Day, sort of leading on from last week. And, of course, we see Black Lives Matter sort of plastered all over the place. I've heard people saying all lives matter. And I've heard other people saying, hey, you shouldn't really be saying that, because this is a cause to try and help people who are black, who have been, discriminated against. And as you're saying, this has gone for a long time, and it's partly due to, what Darwin has done. So black lives do matter, and because they have had so much discrimination, it's good for people to understand why some of this has sort of happened and where it came from. And, of course, Darwin was one of the culprits.
Well, he definitely was, Mick, and this whole idea of white supremacy, I'm sure you can't blame Darwin for it in its entirety, but it's impossible to overemphasize the effect that he had. And really his views on where humanity had come from made a profound difference to the sorts of anthropological announcements, if you like, that started out in the world. And most people are aware that there were frauds and really crazy ideas come forth after Darwin. I mean, we most are aware of the Piltdown Man fraud. Piltdown Man was supposedly one of our ancestors, ape-like ancestors. And Piltdown Man was a fraudulent skull that had combined a bit of human skull and a bit of an ape skull and stained it to make it look old. And that fooled the world for about 40 years. Now, until it was exposed as a forgery and a fraud. But it fooled the world because that's what people wanted to believe.
Yeah.
And we have that idea, remember we've talked about it on the program, about so-called Nebraska Man in the US. And there were drawings of Nebraska Man and his family and where they lived and all this sort of stuff. And it was based on one tooth, and the tooth turned out to be a pig tooth.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of things were built up on the basis of Darwinian beliefs.
And it's interesting over time then, once that's been created, then other people build their stories on top of that. It ends up in textbooks, and then when that one comes out as a fraud, it doesn't really change everything else that came out based on that evidence.
No, and we've had people like Cro-Magnon Man and Java Man and all of these supposed ancestors, and yet there really isn't any truth in any of it. And what we find with DNA and genetics is that the people that were believed to be in our ancestry, like Neanderthals or the Denisovans, we're all carrying the same DNA, bits of it anyway.
Yeah.
And bear in mind that you'll often see mention of this group of people from Siberia called the Denisovans, but we don't have a lot of DNA evidence. It's based on a little bit of DNA from two small bones of two individuals. Now, that's not a lot to base a whole ancestry profile on. But we do have some of their DNA still.
It's interesting how quickly the stories are made up. I mentioned a story about a whale yesterday, Rice's whale, over in the Gulf of Mexico, I think it was, or it washed up on a beach in California. And they say, look, it's a brand new species of whale. This is a, like 13-metre long whale. Brand new species. There's less than 100 of them in the world. They grow up to this size. They can live to this age. And all the information they gave us, and it was based on one whale that washed up on a beach. And I thought, wow, how do they get all of this info? And of course, there's so much goes into it that's just guesswork, and it's the same thing when it comes to discovering bones. There's a lot of guesswork that goes into it, and read the stories and see these pictures that could be 98% false.
Yeah, well that's right. The story concocted around the discovery often turns out to be pretty fanciful. But I probably used an expression that I shouldn't have used then. I said that we have the Denisovan DNA. No, we don't. We have some DNA that is the same as the Denisovan people had. And we have some DNA that is the same that the Neanderthal people had. So that doesn't mean that they're in our ancestry. It means that we are all part of the same humanity. And we do have a lot more information about Neanderthals, of course. There are quite a few individuals from which DNA has been extracted, and they were obviously modern humans. They made musical instruments, they painted on caves, they clearly could speak because they have the same speech genes as we have, and they buried their dead. I mean, they behaved just like humans do now, and so they are clearly modern humans. And okay, we scoff at the whole sort of Flintstone idea of cavemen, but why did they live in caves? Because they needed shelter, and caves were the only shelter available to them after Noah's flood. And we need to remember what a destructive event Noah's flood was. It completely remade the original world. And caves are sandstone, and that's where sandstone came from. It came from Noah's flood. And as we read and deduce from the biblical account, all the trees on earth had been uprooted and buried as what we have now as coal. So caves were the best shelter around the place. So that's why they lived in caves. Yeah. Common sense.
Yep, makes sense to me too. I'd live in a cave if there was nowhere else to go. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Look, it is 16 minutes to 9. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. We've heard a lot about Darwin this morning. Very interesting stories, and his expeditions around South America and then to Australia. If you have any questions, please send them through 0401 949 949. Had a very interesting talk about Charles Darwin this morning, and Dr. John, I have to bring up another story that's been in the media over the last week. Of course, there's 3 landers all sort of arriving on Mars right now, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, it's fantastic technologically too, Mick, to have an amazing, really, that we've got 3 different Mars probes all arriving at Mars at the same time.
Yeah, from 3 completely different groups of people.
There's one from the United Arab Emirates, which is arriving today, and a Chinese one that's arriving tomorrow, and a NASA one arriving next week. And the reason they're all at the same time is because they were all launched about the same time, July last year, when Mars was fairly close to Earth. Yep. So that's why they kicked them off there. But I thought it was quite interesting that the name of the Chinese probe is Tianwen-1,
yes,
which in Chinese means search for heavenly truth. Amazing, isn't it? And I mean, that's what they are searching for. They're all really searching for evidence of life elsewhere in the universe, and we've talked about the likelihood of them finding that. But look, the Arab Emirates one is only going into orbit. It's not putting a lander down, and the Chinese one isn't putting its lander down until May, I think.
Yep. But
the NASA one next week is going to put a new little buggy called Perseverance rover down on the surface.
Yep.
Well, we've seen all their earlier models that they landed on the surface of Mars, but Perseverance rover is going to be a bit smarter than that too, I think.
Well, he's coming back again, isn't he?
Yeah. Look, it's really very, very interesting. And I thought one of the interesting things, and this is how technology works, the Chinese probe, which sent back a photo of Mars from about 2.2 million kilometres away, it's apparently about 185 million kilometres from Earth at the present time. But it's travelled 465 million kilometres, which seems a bit strange, doesn't it? It's travelled far more than the distance it currently is.
Yes.
And I think what they did was, I think they did a circuit of the sun to use the sun's gravity as giving them a bit of a slingshot effect to fire off to get to Mars. I mean, that really is fantastic technology. You know, you have to admire the people who've got into this and worked out how to do it. And clearly they've got things right, because there's 3 of them arriving pretty much at the same time. So what they're going to do is have a look and send back bits and pieces of rock. Certainly the NASA one is.
Yes.
I think the Chinese one may only be sampling it and examining it on site.
Sending information back about it.
Sending the information back about it. And whether they find any explanation for some of these supposed landslides that have occurred on Mars. They think they've seen big landslides that may have been the result of salt and water or whatever. All very interesting stuff, and I can't wait for some of the results to come back and see what they find. But will they find any evidence of life? That's the big question.
Well, the NASA guys said that this the whole purpose of this rover is a key step in determining whether life ever existed on Mars.
Yeah, well, look, and we've talked about this many times on the program, is the reason why modern science believes they're going to find life elsewhere in the universe is because they believe it evolved on Earth. Now, we don't believe it evolved on Earth. We believe it was specifically created on Earth. Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't have been specifically created elsewhere, but it certainly hasn't evolved elsewhere. because it hasn't evolved on Earth. But look, it's all very interesting stuff, and we're going to find out more in due course.
Yes, yes. Well, of course, the Bible doesn't talk about is there life anywhere else, so it'll be interesting. But, of course, there's also some people that want to find life somewhere else so as they can build a whole new model of belief, because they don't want to believe the Bible and the creation story.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true, and we really do need to be absolutely certain that because of the Bible we know that God created, and because of that we know that there is a God. Now, the search for extraterrestrial life by evolution, when you boil it all down, it's really to prove that we don't need God. Yeah. And that's what Christianity is all about, to convince people that not only is there a creator God, that he has come to earth in the person of Jesus. He did do what we know Jesus did. He lived the perfect life on our behalf. He was crucified and executed to pay the price for our sin, and to demonstrate by his resurrection that we have an eternal future that is glorious and there with God. And that's what most of the world is resisting believing. And unfortunately, if they resist believing that, their future or their eternal future is not going to be as pleasant as those who have believed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. John, thank you. Another awesome week. We've got to wait another 3 weeks now till we hear from you again. So I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, that'll be great, Mick. And keep the questions coming. Make sure you text them. Don't try and send us voice messages because we can't retrieve that. But the number is 0401 949 949. And remember, it must be a text.
Absolutely. 0401 949 949. Well, thank you, Dr. John. We'll see you in 3 weeks. It is 8:56. You're on 94.9.